Digital colonialism. What is digital colonialism? How is digital colonialism changing our world? Every time we connect to the internet, we generate data. This data becomes the raw material for digital colonialism's production processes. So, what is that product of digital colonialism? The product is algorithm predictions about how we behave, based on the sweeping data big tech companies collect. The algorithm makes decisions about our lives based on all the information it is fed. It has the power to predict and determine our behavior. Some authors call this the behavioral surplus. Why is this product so valuable? Businesses are eager to pay for predictions about our behavior as consumers. Our behavior as citizens is interesting for governments and others to scrutinize. In a new phase of cyber capitalism, our behavior as workers enables new levels of workplace surveillance. Who is selling these products? Who is processing this information? And who is doing the programming? There are the big tech companies like Google, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft. There are two interrelated levers that make these companies so valuable: data and platforms. How did the big tech companies monopolize the digitalization of the economy? Big tech companies become leaders in global digital value chains. Their profits depend on sustaining their power to extract data. They use their significant power to fight for rules that enable them to keep control. They need rules to entrench a business model that allows them to be the owners of cyber capital, to guarantee their monopoly over that behavioral surplus in perpetuity, and enable them to eliminate competitors and establish themselves as the only future technological model. How do these rules work? The World Trade Organization regulates some free trade agreements, including digital chapters that lay out rules, which give all the rights to large transnational big tech companies, and restrict the ability of states to regulate, to redistribute profits, to improve public services, or to take forward local technological development strategies. Which digital trade rules limit state sovereignty? First, clauses that hinder digital industrialization in Global South countries, such as the free flow of cross-border data transfer, prohibitions on data localization, prohibitions on local data processing, non-disclosure of source codes of software and related algorithms, elimination of customs duties on digital products and electronic transmissions, and electronic public procurement. Second, clauses that restrict states' control of corporate activities, such as prior authorization, non-discrimination against digital products, electronic authentication and signatures, surveillance, and liability of intermediary service providers. And third, clauses that violate citizens' rights, such as free flow of data with no protection of personal data and online consumer protection, including the weakness of the rule to prevent unsolicited electronic marketing communications. What will be the impact of these rules? The impact of these rules. First, countries in the Global South will be harmed by brutal competition that will hamper the development of incipient local technologies. Second, they limit the ability of states to control companies operating online, shaping digital markets, and giving the corporations rights while relieving them of duties. Third, the rules can remove protections for citizens and consumers, especially in the Global South, by imposing requirements without transferring the resources needed to meet them. So we need a stronger government in setting regulations to protect personal data from the profits of big tech companies, especially agreements that open up more freedom for them. So, if you need more information about digital colonialism, you can visit our website. Thank you.
that being organized by the Sub-Working Group on Digitalizations, TNI, HINS, IT for Change, Wikimedia Foundations, Lokataru, ELSAM, and Indonesia for Global Justice. My name is Rachel Judistari of Wikimedia Foundations, and I will be moderating these important discussions today. So in the upcoming 2 hours, we will have a list of esteemed speakers representing the organizers, but also critical minds on digital rights around the world. And we also will have the responses from Ministry of IT Indonesia, as well as the Department of Trade, Industry, and Competitions of South Africa. So without further ado, I would like to request Mr. Iwan Nordin, the Director of Lokataru Foundations, to give a warm welcome on behalf of the co-organizer. Mas Iwan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderators. Good evening, everyone. My name is Iwan Nurdin. I'm from Lokataru Foundation, and welcome to everyone in this high-level panels. This is the panel organized by Wikimedia, and then Lokataru Foundation, Oxfam, what else? TNI. Yeah. HINS organizations. Many organizations involved in this very important discussion. And we know the cross-border data flows already discussed since in G20 in Osaka. And at that time, several discussions in principle and laws, and also about the transparency already been discussed, but until today not conclude to the concrete to the people that's benefit to us. And we already know today the digitalization is triggering the cross-border data flows. The digitalization of the economics already changed everything, disrupting in everything and everywhere, and also connect and reconnecting the people. And as we understand that we need to ensure this discussion to contribute to the G20, because we know when we're talking about the cross-border data flows, this is not about the economic growth, because the main player who talking about the cross-border data flows is the economic mainstreaming issue, and then also the economic institution. Less discussion about the human rights base, less discussion about the how the people have a benefit from this cross-border data. Then we need to discuss more about the how we ensuring the human right-based approach to the cross-border database, right to the access of the data, and also many things. I think all the speakers will be very excellent to discuss about this, and welcome to everyone, and also speakers, moderators, and the participant. Please, I believe we will have a very important discussion and contribute to the G20, and also continues to the C20 in India. Thank you very much, and please welcome discussion.
Thank you so much, Mas Iwan, for the warm welcome to everyone here. But we also want to take note of our online participants who have joined us from across the world. And I really encourage our online participants to use the chat functions for introducing yourself and also the organization that you're representing. And if you have any burning comments, questions, feel free to also use the chat box to raise that. And on behalf of the sub-working group on digitalizations, I would like to inform everyone here that we have 3 thematic priorities in line with the G20 Summit this year. The first thematic priorities is the inclusive digital identifications and health data system, human rights-based approach to cross-border data flows, as well as open and free knowledge. However, as per our initial discussions, the themes of cross-border data flows is still become one of the burning issues to be discussed given the nuances as well as the dynamic nature of the discourse. Therefore, we are here today to hear Parminder to set the tone on what is recommendation of civil society on cross-border data flows, to also understand the co-optations of data data control in the global north, as well as protections of privacy. So with that, Parminder, you will have 8 minutes to set the tone.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and thanks for participants from governments and online participants. I'm Parminder from IT for Change. So I'll quickly use my initial framing to speak first about why is cross-border data flows important at all. Second, about what has been geopolitical history of discussions around cross-border data flow. And then I'll come up to the human rights framing of cross-border data flows. So we have made this policy brief, which is there. We have proposed a cross-border data flow with data rights as a framework which can go beyond cross-border data flow with the data free flow with trust, which is one which is being discussed in G20 currently. Now, first of all, to see why is it important? I mean, one thing has been already said by Rachel that generally how do you know an issue is important is when the discussions over it are intense and sometimes inconclusive. And if that one issue in G20 is of that nature, is cross-border data flows. There's a big contestation between North and South in this regard. And I will excuse if today this panel takes a more southern view of free flow of data flow. We are also concerned about a northern view, but this panel will probably take a more southern view. The context of a cross-border data flow is that everybody says that data is the single most valuable resource in the world, which is fine. But if it is the single most valuable resource in the world, why should it flow freely from some countries to the other countries? And the kind of concentration which data flows and the product of data, which is AI or digital intelligence, is causing. And first of all, we should recognize the real value of data is in the intelligence which people squeeze out of data. Data itself is not valuable, but big platform companies collect data and they squeeze intelligence, and that intelligence becomes even higher than intellectual property in global value chains. I will come to those descriptions. And therefore, whoever has the intelligence about transportation systems, hotels, e-commerce, etc., whoever owns that intelligence would become the richest big companies. Today, 8 companies out of the global top 10 companies are data companies. 10, 15 years back. Yeah. So I would also take this occasion to welcome Dr. Nyonim Adhyarna, who's the Director of Digital Economy at the Ministry of Communication and Information, Indonesia. Welcome. And also Sudhir Suklal, who is Director, Multilateral Organizations, Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, South Africa, whom I had an opportunity to also meet recently. So we will be going for their views, but I thought we should frame the kind of issues which people feel important, and then they can respond with their views. So what is happening is that a new kind of global flows of value are being created. And it could be as bad as what happened after Industrial Revolution, when there was colonization of the kind we know. And just to give you that shock value of what happened after industrialization, I will quote some figures. At the start of the industrialization, do you have an idea what kind of, and I'll take India's example, and excuse me for that, what proportion of global GDP was produced in India? I mean, these would be very rough figures. Nobody was making precise figures at that time. It was around 25%. And then came industrialization and colonization and so on. And by the time the colonizers left India, the proportion of Indian contribution to global GDP was 2%. Now, what was happening is, you know, that there was industrial units in the West. The colonized countries were made producers of primary goods. Those goods were used in the industrialized countries as raw material. Manufactured goods were sent back, and this story is well known. Now, we need to understand what is happening currently in the digital age. So the data is produced, like all people produce it, all societies produce data, so data is continuously produced. This data is then sucked into largely two countries, US and China, who own 90% value of the top 70 platforms of the world, which is more or less all value of the top 70 platforms of the world. They are just in US and in China. And this kind of concentration of value has never occurred even in digital age. Then EU would have some industry, and even India and Indonesia used to have some industry, but here 90% of the platform capitalization is of 70 top platforms is in US and China. So what's happening? Like a city like Bali will generate data about transportation. Indonesia is somewhat fortunate that it has a lot of local platforms, startups. But India also had them a few years back, and they do get eaten up by multinational companies. In India, they were bought out. So what happens is, like, take an example of India, New Delhi, there's a lot of data being produced on transportation that's sucked into by a global company like Uber, which then develops transportation intelligence out of that data and then controls the transportation system of that city. And that's true of e-commerce and then small service, handyman jobs. Everything gets controlled by whoever controls that data. So we have a new way the value flows, whereby the data producers are developing countries and some developed countries, like one developing country and one developed country. If you call China developing in digital aspects, may not be so. But these two countries have the platforms which then take that data and produce intelligence out of it. So therefore, there's an effort of other countries to think, and that's even true of EU. If you really search Google about data sovereignty and digital sovereignty, you'll be surprised that the most mention of this term comes from EU leaders today. It's not from developing countries. Now, developing countries call it data colonization, and I completely understand why EU doesn't want to use the word colonization. So they call it data sovereignty. But that's exactly the same thing, basically. So they are the leaders who are very, very worried. So that's the issue of cross-border data flows. Now I come to the history of what has happened, and I'm really not left with much time. At the WTO, there were some proposals made that all countries should sign on a free flow of data regime. But most developing countries did not understand what is happening, basically. But they knew instinctively something is wrong here. I mean, generally they think something is wrong if it comes from developed countries, by the way, just joking. But they were thinking, what is the issue? And that's where developing countries start thinking, why should we be worried about our economic aspects? And now quickly, I've got 1 minute, but then the developed countries at the G20 Osaka said, okay, we understand you don't want free flow of data. We'll add free flow of data with trust to free flow of data. So your problems have been taken care of. And the developing countries said, no, sorry, but that was not our problem. No, we have a problem of privacy, but our problems were largely economic. So all developing countries, largely South Africa, India, Indonesia, did not sign to the data free flow of with trust regime. Again, in the meetings of the Digital Economy Working Group recently, this remained a problem. So then it went to UNCTAD. UNCTAD was doing its summit document last year. And then also they framed a new term, which said data flow with trust. They removed free, which is very significant, which makes the point that data is not free. So they just removed the word free during negotiations. The UNCTAD document, which is negotiated by all countries, they could only agree on data flow with trust. So what we are proposing, and you also talked about human rights. Now, human rights, we should understand, are not just the civil and political rights. even economic rights are human rights. And actually in this policy paper, there's a picture which shows a balance between privacy and a loaf of bread, right? So we cannot sacrifice economic rights of people in place of civil and political rights. And there's a long history of indivisibility of rights and 3 generations of rights. Civil political rights is the first generation, the second generation is economic, cultural, and social rights, and third generation is collective rights. So we are saying, yes, let data flow with rights, but the rights would also be economic, cultural, and social, plus they would also be collective, and national communities would also own that data. And if we accept that kind of rights framing, developing countries would probably love to have data flow freely, because we do want a global economy. But it's like, my money, I don't have that kind of money, but if I had it, if it was in Swiss banks, I know the bank money is safe, because they will never say it's not my money, because there's an international system which recognizes my economic rights over my money. Now, if similar rights were recognized over data, then developing countries would be fine to share this data. So while I'll just stop the introduction of what has been happening in this field, and I would now request, and Rachel will introduce the 2 government officials who are here, who would have their presentations, of course, but also to give us some indication of which direction this debate is going to go in their opinion, and what kind of effort developing countries should make to make the narrative on their side. For example, when intellectual property issues hit developing countries and TRIPS kind of things happened, then there was this access to knowledge movement in which South Africa played a big part. So what should we be doing to develop our own narrative is something we would like to learn. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Parminder, for that presentations to set the tone on what we've discussed within the sub-working group on digitalizations. And I think also I would like to congratulate on the passage of the PDP law in Indonesia. I think it's really huge milestones on the privacy protections. And this is something that the sub-working group also would like to emphasize on the cross-border data flows. And tonight we also have Dr. Insinyur Inyoman Adiana M. the Director of Digital Economy from the Ministry of IT Indonesia. Good afternoon, Pak Inyoman. Thank you so much for joining us today. We understand that you have limited time to join us today, but we really want to hear your thoughts on the recommendations on what should be the directions of Indonesia commitment to CPDF in the context of our chairships in G20. Pak Inyoman, would it be possible for us to give the microphone to you right now?
Yes, I hope you could
Yes.
listen my voice clearly.
Yes, you are audible, Pak. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Indonesia, and good morning and good afternoon, people who join this dialogue virtually. I'm in the middle of my trip. I hope there's no much noise around me. And first of all, thank you for the invitation, and thanks to CC Pak Iwan. I understand distinguished panel, ladies and gentlemen, and I understand that there is high expectation from the civil society about the outcome of the G20 Digital Economy Working Group, particularly on the issue of the data free flow trust. Actually, the official term in the G20 is data free flow trust, since we have discussed in Osaka, 2019. And of course, maybe some people say that there's not quite a concrete outcome from the G20 Digital Economy Working Group. I understand the expectation from the society is very high, but it's talking about digital data free flow with trust is basically one of the most contentious issue in our working group. So that's why into my opinion, this is the best outcome we can achieve so far. Yeah. And also, I understand Ibu Siti that we just finalized our personal data protection law I think it is a very good progress for us after a long time, after very long, more than 5 years. I think we have discussed about this draft, this personal data protection law, but we need another government regulation, another lower level regulation to make this regulation much more workable. Allow me to make use of my slide to make my presentation much more clear. Okay, and this is my. I hope everyone can see my slide. Has difficulty? No, oh, sorry. This one, I think.
Yes, we
Okay.
can see.
Can you wait? Oh, no. I then 1 second, please. 1 second, please.
Okay.
I propose using the PowerPoint. I propose using my PowerPoint. Maybe. Sorry. There's my PowerPoint. I cannot find my PowerPoint. This one, I think. Yes. This. Oh, sorry, a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Everybody can see my presentation. I hope quite clear. Let me jump to the next slide. Actually, when we're talking about data equity trust, we understand that the economic side is also important. When we know that the other issue is related with, of course, human rights, sovereignty, and etc. So without here, for example, the use of data is very big, yeah. For instance, retail and manufacturing sectors, every 10% increase in bilateral digital connectivity contributes to 3.1 growth in the trade and services. This is according to data from Untitled. And Indonesia, this is for the overview, we propose 4 principles: lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. And the last one, reciprocity, is not supported by many members. So, and the next one, and I think this is part Iwan just mentioned. Yeah, we just start discussion with this issue on the Japan. Yeah, Japan is the first country to introduce the discussion on this issue. Then Saudi Arabia, different discussion, and finally, and then after that, in the 2021, Italy is very reluctant to discuss about this issue, data free flow with trust, because there's no more progress. There's not much progress in the discussion at the time on on year 2021. So Italy basically a little bit reluctant to discuss this issue. There was much progress at the time, and Indonesia finally chose this issue. Cross-border data flow or data free flow with trust is one of the key priority issues, together with connectivity and post-COVID recovery and digital and digital literacy. As I mentioned previously, cross-border data flow is one of the most contentious issues. It is very difficult to find the agreement with the member countries, and compared to the other priority issues such as connectivity and digital talent. And this is the potential, the mapping the potential. I am sorry, I have to report the progress, yeah, and then we can discuss about the issue. There's different understanding is one important issue. For example, about the 4 principles and values. Talking about lawfulness, fairness, transparency, and reciprocity, each member country maybe they have different opinions, different view about this issue. Then there is technical gap between state and differences in the data classification system. This is another issue. Market competition in each country also different. And we expect that India the next presidency 2023, India will continue this discussion on this issue. The second, the other aspect is about the utilization of personal data, also important issue that every country maybe has different view on this issue. And this is the challenge when we conducting the discussion on the data free flow free trust in the G20. Some countries may be not willing to support the discussion because they don't have the principle. They don't have yet this best data security practice. They have not yet have best data security practice. Some actors, I think you know all of them. Some actors are competent to scale the direction of the global data governance. So maybe they are also reluctant to discuss about this issue. Some countries have not formulated policy aligned with the idea of PFFC. Actually, Indonesia just started, formulated policy on this issue. And this and another issue. I will not talk everyone. Then yeah. Oh, what? I'll skip this one. This is about the share summary on the C2022, but you can take a look. You can browse on the share summary. But this is I think from the onset, very important that we have to take a note that there's a policy mapping on data free trust. Yeah. When we make the regulation on this issue, there are many conditions affecting our national interest. Yeah, it is in terms of institution, in terms of technology, economy, policy, and culture. Those conditions will reshape our regulation on this data free trust. And also the background setting, I think maybe some country may be focusing much on the economic development. Some country may be focusing on privacy and human rights, law enforcement and national security. And the way we conduct the discussion on this issue is very deep. There are many ways. The legal instruments, there are many legal instruments. Some countries may be push the discussion on this through the trade agreement, particularly between developed country and developing country. About tax, also in relation with the government procurement. For the case of Indonesia, let's for instance, when for instance, when the government has outsourced the software development, for the government purpose, it is mandatory for us to have the source code. This kind of thing, I think, affect how we formulate the policy on the cross-border data flow. Legal approach also, there are many settings. Yeah. In the past, Indonesia maybe focused on the full data localization. It means that any data should be stored in the data server in Indonesia, should be stored in the data located in Indonesia. But the current government regulation 71 gives more flexibility that only the strategic data, we call it strategic data, should be stored in Indonesia. The other can be stored anywhere. So we give more flexibility, except maybe from the financial services. They have their own regulation. It is still mandatory. Data related with the bank to be stored in Indonesia. But the point is, we expect that, I think, from UNTAD, different countries need to find an optimal balance between domestic economic development, protecting public policy interests, and integrating into the global digital ecosystem. And I will not mention the remaining best practice about the principles that when we formulate the principle, it is actually referred to the GDPR. The three principles: lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. It's based on GDPR, but also there are many other international best practice actually as a reference. And this is about the transfer of data, but we will discuss later. But basically, in Indonesia, any transfer of data from Indonesia to other countries should have the approval from the supervision from the Ministry of Institution and Law Enforcement. And it is the important point, I think, in the personal data protection law is there is transfer of personal data is prohibited without the consent of the data subject. Consent, the approval, is very important issue for personal data protection law in Indonesia. And in Indonesia, we have so many challenge that there are every government, every agency, basically they have their own regulation related with the data. But we hope after we enact the personal data protection law, every regulation will refer to this law, personal data protection. I think that this is the last slide. Actually, this is the last slide. That what's the mechanism for data transfer from Indonesia to other countries according to our personal data protection law? It is one. It is basically this is based on the reference for the GDPR. For instance, the destination country has an equivalent or higher level of personal data protection. I think it is also in GDPR. There are international agreement between two countries. If there is no agreement between two countries on the personal data protection, so the data is not allowed to be transferred to other countries. There's a contract, personal data controller, that have standard and guarantee and for the protection. And of course, the most important key is consent. Any transfer of data should be get the consent from the personal data subject or the data owner. I think that this is just a some summary what we get from the G20 DWG. Some already mentioned, yeah. Already mentioned this one. I think this is the end of my presentation. Sorry, I think I make mistake. Sorry. I think this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Let's give big round of applause to Bapak Nyoman Adiarna. Thank you so much, Pak Nyoman, for the very comprehensive insight on what has been discussed within the G20 ministerial meeting on the data free flow with trust. I totally resonate with you that this is such an icy topics within CSOs ourselves. There are a lot of divergent views, and we are trying to find a common ground. So I hope that these high-level discussions is not going to be the last chance for us to be interacting with you. We really hope to have audience with the TEWG members or the Ministry of IT so that we can further shape a balanced views on this newly discourse that will affecting us all within G20. So thank you so much, Pak Nyoman. We appreciate that you take time. I know you have very busy schedule, and we'll definitely be in touch. And with that, I actually would like to also invite the floor to our next representative of governments from South Africa. We have Sudhir Suklal, the Director of Multilateral Organizations Department of Trade, Industry and Competition, South Africa. Sudhir, after hearing from Parminder and also Pak Nyoman, we really want to get your insight on South African views on the cross-border data flows, and how can the recommendations from civil society would be able to enrich South Africa positions on these topics. So with that, Sudhir, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Chair, and greetings to all the participants, those who are there physically as well as those who are online. And let me thank Nyoman for his excellent presentation in setting out the issues, particularly with regard to the G20. I have a presentation. I'm going to try and go through it as quickly as I can in the interests of time. If you could put it up, please. Thank you. I have focused my presentation on trying to give you an overview of the trajectory of developments with regard to cross-border data flows in the African context, and also specifically what we in South Africa have done and are doing currently with regard to this issue. Next slide, please. It goes without saying that the explosion of digital trade has impacted on all aspects of our lives, and this has unlocked innovation in all economic sectors, from healthcare to manufacturing. We're all fully aware of the benefits of the digital economy. However, we need to be equally, if not more, concerned by the challenges that are posed by the digital economy. I think an interesting point here is this McKinsey study, which I think is quite old data, but according to that, in 2014, cross-border data flows had raised global GDP by approximately 2.8 trillion, which is 3%. And this had already exceeded the amount generated by global goods trade in the same year. It gives you an idea of the economic value of cross-border data flows in just a short space of time compared to established trade networks that have existed for centuries. Next slide, please. Hello?
We can hear you. You're very audible from our side.
Can we go to the next? Oh,
okay.
Can you go one back, please? It is interesting to note that there has been a steep rise in the number of domestic localization requirements in recent years, even though particularly post-pandemic, we have seen such a vast increase in online activity. And the number of countries that have done so, whereas in 2017, we had 35 countries that had DLRs. Last year, it had risen to 62. And the total number of data localization restrictions has more than doubled from 67 in 2017 to 144 last year. Next slide, please. I think the previous presentation touched on some of this. Generally, there are three types of domestic localization requirements. And these relate to the restriction of transfer of data outside borders. And then secondly, data is deemed to be sensitive or security related. And then lastly, where governments allow it on the fulfillment of certain conditions. An example of this is the EU's GDPR. However, it should be noted that these conditional flow regimes can de facto be DLRs, as the cost of compliance is very high and difficult. Next slide, please. I've already alluded to this, the reasons for DLR. I think this is generally understood. Next slide, please. Now, this gives you a snapshot of what's happening in the African continent with regard to domestic localization requirements. According to GSMA data, there is roughly a 50-50 split between those that are open and those that are restricted. There are currently 26 countries that have no data restrictions on cross-border data flows. 26 have conditional flow regimes. And 2 countries have no prior restrictions for data transfers, but ex-post accountability for data exporters. Nigeria is the only African country currently to explicitly adopt strict domestic localization requirements for economic reasons. All government, subscriber, and consumer data held by telecommunication companies cannot be transmitted outside the country. These measures were adopted to address Nigeria's negative trade balance in the IT sector. Next, please. Nigeria hopes to achieve this, addressing this deficit by promoting the need for Nigerian local content to add domestic value to ICT products and services. And here it also relates to developing local skills transfer, technology transfer, using local labor, and developing local manufacturing. Rwanda also has implemented regulations where it stipulates that a copy of the personal data of its citizens must be stored in Rwanda. The other countries, if I can quickly mention, in the continent that have already adopted strict data protection regulations, Zambia, Chad, Senegal, Tunisia, Uganda, and Zimbabwe. We are still in the process of what we refer to as our draft policy, so I'm not going to list us in that group just yet. Next, please. Excuse me. We published our draft national policy on data and cloud for comment last year. A broad objective of this policy, or this draft policy, is it seeks to enable citizens to realize the socio-economic value of data. Some of the key objectives is to promote universal access to broadband connectivity and access to data and cloud services, remove regulatory barriers and enable competition in the data and cloud sector, support SMMEs, promote data sovereignty and security with respect to South African data, and encourage alignment with the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the OECD framework, and standards adopted by the EU, specifically the GDPR. I should point out here that it doesn't necessarily mean that we will replicate the GDPR. We are simply using it as a benchmark for now. The eventual policy must be biased towards open standards and open systems, including open source frameworks. It recommends the establishment of a government-backed digital platform for all citizens to be allocated a digital identity to promote services delivery. It also discusses the need for a wireless open access network to advance the digital footprint across the country. And it proposes the establishment of a state digital infrastructure company, which will provide network connectivity for the state. Next. When it comes to cloud computing infrastructure, the proposals in the draft policy highlights the need to process data using cloud computing infrastructure. And it makes provision for data storage architecture and the purchase of capacity from cloud service providers. It highlights the importance of cloud services and their role in exploiting the benefits of OIR, such as blockchain, Internet of Things, and artificial intelligence. Proposes the establishment of a digital transformation center to catalyze digital South Africa. It proposes the establishment of a high-performance computing and data processing center to manage cloud computing capacity for the state and its functionaries, universities, research centers, and South African businesses, and to provide user on-demand cloud services for the state and its functionaries. Currently, investment in data centers are largely centralized in large metropolitan areas, and it's mostly foreign-owned. One of the objectives of the draft policy is to promote the decentralization of these data centers, particularly in rural and underserviced areas. It also calls for the establishment of a digital special economic zone, which will promote the establishment of digital industries and services. And intrinsically linked to this SEZ will be the requirement for the promotion of skills and technology transfer. Next. On data protection, data localization, and cross-border data transfers, it calls for the processing of personal data or personal information, specifically metadata, must be compliant with applicable laws. The Protection of Personal Information Act came into force in 2016. This act also calls for the establishment of an information regulator, which has been established. It's up and running. And it is principally responsible for the oversight and enforcement of these two acts, what we call the POPIA Act and the PAIA, which is the Promotion of Access to Information Act. Surprisingly, there are currently no data localization requirements in SA, although the draft policy seeks to impose these, and it also defines data localization. I should point out that as South Africa, well, certainly in my opinion, we have been slow to respond to the challenge of the digital economy. And the fact that this is still a draft policy and still being subject to debate and public comment, and as you can see, almost 18 months have passed since we published it last year. And it is an extremely contested proposed policy, and there are lots of tussles, as you can understand, between what we may call civil society and the interests of industry in South Africa. But please take note of the fact that when I refer to industry, I'm also referring to the big multinationals that are already present in the South African market. The proposals also called for our companies and the Intellectual Property Commission and the National Intellectual Property Management Office to develop a policy framework on data generated from intellectual activities, including the sharing and use of such data. Next, please. And then lastly, on cybersecurity, the ECTA is our Electronic Communications and Transactions Act, and it calls for this act to align with our cybersecurity policy and legislation. The Cybercrimes Act of 2020 is not yet in force, so that's legislation that still has to come into effect. The draft policy proposes the establishment of a national cybersecurity policy framework, which will provide guidance on cybersecurity initiatives and measures. And it proposes that the government develop and implement cybersecurity awareness initiatives to educate the public. The next slide, please. In terms of the way forward with this draft policy, upon its finalization, it will apply to all levels of government, all three spheres of government. Government entities, our private sector, this includes domestic and foreign investors seeking to invest in digital infrastructure in South Africa, and the general public. Next, please. I wanted to quickly touch on the WTO initiatives that are going on in Geneva, and Parminder has already alluded to them. As you know, the JSI on e-commerce is very busy with its agenda in Geneva, and it is pursuing a deregulatory approach, calling for the removals of things like data localization requirements, including computing and server facilities. We should take note of the fact that many developed countries have data localization requirements and have invested heavily in such infrastructure. These massive data hubs exist. And what can be deduced from that is that those who control the data control the economic trajectory of the industry. And South Africa, together with other developing countries, have consistently called for the policy space that we need to exploit the benefits of the digital economy, as well as deal with the challenges that it poses. And in our view, these are very significant challenges. And I think developing countries, together with the active support of their civil society, need to play a much stronger role in countering this very, very strong push by these JSIs that are currently underway in Geneva. As South Africa, we have not joined any of these so-called plurilateral initiatives for reasons that you probably all share. And lastly, I'd like to just touch on the G20 issues that we discussed in our group. I was part of our delegation to the trade investment and industry working group in Bali 2 weeks ago. And some of the most contentious discussions slash arguments that we had related to the issue of cross-border data flows and digital industries. The US in particular was extremely strongly opposed to the idea, to our proposal on the reaffirmation of data for development. They insisted on only having data free flow with trust, but we argued very strongly for the inclusion of data for development. Unfortunately, for reasons best known to everyone, the final ministerial declaration could not be issued because of differences over the Russia-Ukraine war, which in our view was a pity, because we actually did manage to get agreement eventually, even though it was at 6 a.m. on the last day, the Friday, on all the text. And I felt that as developing countries, we actually did make quite significant strides in shifting the textual tone of the G20 text. However, it remains to be seen what does come out eventually, whether we do get an eventual agreement amongst the members or whether Indonesia issues it as a chair's text. But I can see these issues continuing next year during India's presidency. I think that's my last slide. Yes. Thank you very much. And I look forward to engaging with
for that. I hope that you can still join us in these important discussions, and also Panyoman, thank you also for staying with us. I think we really applaud Sudhir and also Panyoman's remarks on basic principles of cross-border data flows, or like data with trust, which is protections to privacy, but also flourishing economic justice to all countries within G20 and even beyond that. And with that, we actually have 2 more respondents here who want to give us a very concise comments on what has been presented by Panyoman and also Sudhir, and also how we can amplify the momentum to discuss and also make political commitment on cross-border data flows. So I'll start with Sofia Scacera from the Transnational Institute. Sofia, if you are here with us in the online platforms, feel free to unmute your microphone and provide your response.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you so much for organizing this panel. The inputs that Newman and Sudhir gave were really good. Thank you very much for that. My reaction to all what I heard throughout this last hour is that I see a world with hope, in the sense that I hear Sudhir saying that his country has been slow in responding to these issues. And I thought, well, all countries have been slow in responding, actually. It's not only South Africa. Most developing countries, they're starting now to discuss these issues domestically, but also when you see United States right now is starting to wonder whether they should negotiate or they should regulate with the big tech companies, while they let them do whatever they wanted for decades already. So what I see is that countries have been slow in responding, but all countries throughout the world. But my hope lies on the fact that right now countries are starting to question themselves, and they're starting a big fight to wonder whether the regulation, the international regulation they should approve and they should pass, should be written at the WTO, written by big tech companies, or we should have a more democratic approach on how to deal with these issues. I heard a lot about the domestic localization requirements, and for reasons of privacy, development, security, there are really different issues why countries start putting domestic localization requirements. And this shows that we need a genuine and important debate over this issue before approving any supranational regulation. I heard with a lot of worry about the WTO. I have been there. I saw how they negotiate the JSI on e-commerce. And what I see there is that there's a lot of trade policy expert just thinking about trade and thinking about data as just one raw material and not something that could benefit the public good, and something that should be treated carefully, because data, it brings information, and with information brings power. And we should be asking ourselves whether we want actors in the global economy that have such a great global power that they can actually write the rules of the economy and they can influence the behavior of people in terms to damage democracy. So this is a really important issue that we should be asking ourselves when we start thinking about how we regulate data and how we should be treating data. So I see with a lot of hope the fact that countries are starting to question, but sure, this is not enough. We need a global framework to understand how data and the digital economy should be regulated. And this should not be in the hands of the WTO. This should be in the hands of the countries, and therefore should be in the hands of the UN, the G20, the OECD, and other forums that countries do participate in other terms, not just trade, not just the economy, but participate with other points of view that make the data not only as economic resource, but also as a human rights resource and as a cultural resource, a social resource, a resource that benefits society as a whole and not just a couple of companies in the economy. Lastly, because I don't want to extend myself a lot because we are running out of time, and also because I do not like long presentations, what I think that we need to really understand it's what competition it's all about in the capitalist system. We are facing a raw material that is being caught by a couple of companies that are monopolizing the economy. I hear Parminder from IT for Change saying, we had a lot of platforms in India, but they have been bought by other companies, they have been captured. And this is really important to understand that it's not enough just to have a regulation over data. It's not enough to have a regulation over localization. We need to tackle competition law also as a good resource to have a competitive capitalist system, because we can do a lot about data, but if we don't manage to regulate these big companies that have the size of many of our states, we will face a world that whenever a country makes an effort to make the digital industrialization happen, these big tech companies will come and buy those companies, those little companies, and we will have a more and more monopolistic digital economy with the rules being done by a couple of companies and for them to use the data the way they want. So I really appreciate all the efforts that the countries are doing in order to have a genuine discussion over these issues. But of course, we need more. We need more of you. We need more of the civil society. We need more democracy in our world, and we need more competition, because at the end, the capitalist system is about competition. It's about having a diverse economy with different tools and different solutions that make society work as a whole. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that remarks. Let's give a round of applause. I think we are highlighting the importance of demanding accountability of the big technology company that dominating the data, and also often violates privacy rights of the users. And I think you also mentioned that there are several safeguards for localizations, including protections of privacy and also respect to democracy, to make sure that it is able to achieve its full potentials in addressing the challenges that we are currently facing. And with that, actually, I would like to also request responses from Alicia Gultom of Hint. If you can provide a concise response on the presentations and information from Pak Nyoman and also Sudhir, that would be really welcome. Floor is yours, Mas Olis.
Okay, thank you. I think Sophia already talked about some point what I like to talk, but I see there is from the presentation from the two countries between Indonesia and Africa highlights that the two countries are already aware about some problems like the privacy data, the economic values, the lack of infrastructures, aware of the data of development, even a lack of regulation. So I think there are some problem with this, and they are facing with how the developed country try to frameworks the regulations. So what are things, I mean, just a little, I want to highlight is about the infrastructure problems. All the countries have a problem with the infrastructures, like what the Indonesians say that they want to make put the localization data here, server in Indonesia, but they have problems, and then they need time to do that. And also what happened in Africa, that they have a problem with the infrastructures. They only and they depend on the private company and extra. So of course, what I highlight is these problems will make it complicated for the future, because in the same times, from the lack of the regulation, a lack of the infrastructures, but the digital technology going very fast, broadly. So then how to catch up the lack of the regulations, that's also for me the question. So I think this is some point for me, and yeah, I think I agree with Sophia that the government should be need a big cooperation with the cooperate with the civil society for doing the regulation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Mat Olis. Actually, we still have about 20 minutes for having interactive discussions with the participants that join us offline and also online. Therefore, I would like to request if anyone in the audience would like to say something, questions, clarifications, or statement of support, that would be really appreciated. Anyone? Okay, we have one. Okay, wait, Parminder want to make a point.
So just before I come to the people who are asking questions, but I thought I was very impressed with both the presentations with Mr. Neumann and Sudhir, vis-a-vis, I work in this area, but I did not know the extent of thinking and knowledge and new ideas that already exist inside some governments. For example, what Neoman talked about, the 4 principles we have covered in our policy brief are really very, very good. And also the kind of thinking which Sudhir presented, what's happening in South Africa. And I have a feeling that, I mean, I work in India, and there are some people from India who are working on data issues close to the government thinking as well. There is not so much shared knowledge within developing countries about, and especially the major developing countries who are involved in digital economy issues, about what is happening. And we had to just come here to be able to know the kind of work, for example, which Mr. Neumann is talking about, those 4 principles, which I think are path-breaking principles really, if we really looked at them. And I don't even know whether South Africa had a chance or India had a chance, real strong chance back at capitals to develop thinking. So my proposal was whether this is a time to do intensive, discussions among key developing countries whose digital economy is larger. Because larger is your digital economy, the challenges are already there. Others may be a little behind and they're thinking that's okay, right now we are doing digital skills and digital literacy, but Indonesia, South Africa, India, Argentina, they are bigger. And they should get together, maybe even use track 2 channels, use their think tanks to get together along with key government officials and do some conclaves to develop thinking. Because as Ulysses was saying, this area moves very fast. In 6 months, most of these ideas will be superseded, and therefore it's good to get some kind of a structured way where these ideas can be developed with think tanks, civil society, and governments. And we would like to hear the 2 government officials what their proposal on this could be. And I give it to Kanika, who wants to make a statement or ask a question.
Please go ahead.
Actually, I completely agree with what
Sorry, can you please introduce your name and also affiliations for the interest of other participants? Thank you.
My name is Dr. Kanika Rakhra. I work with RIS as a consultant. I'd just like to agree with what Parminder was talking about. I think it's a great idea that if the discussions on at least some sort of principles can be discussed within the developing countries as well. It's a great initiative. I actually had a statement, a comment on something that Parminder had mentioned in his presentation. You spoke about how data is an individual, as an individual is not much relevant, but collectively it produces knowledge and intelligence. But the problem with any privacy law is also that an individual is asked whether they want to share their data or not. And as an individual, when I'm asked whether my data can be shared, I don't see it technically as a problem. And only when I see the collective impact of that data do I realize how big a problem it can or cannot become. So just sort of a comment based on what you were saying, and a problem I think that we will be facing when we're talking about data governance and how it can be taken forward. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, I just want to check, Mas Muslim, if we have like any questions or comments online. Okay, I cannot really see it. Okay, Mas Marahmi, can you? I think she will do that.
Yeah, it's a question for Mr. Adiana. How do you expect to protect Indonesia's policies related to data localization requirements in the new privacy law from big tech's influence in the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF?
Thank you. So we have 2 questions.
Only one.
Only one. Okay, thank you. And then I also would like to invite the members of Subworking Group on Digitalizations. We also have Shefi from LSAM here, and she was also in charge on creating CPDF. So perhaps like after the response, I also would like to request you to share about what was the discussions within the Subworking Group on Digitalizations pertaining these issues, Shefi. So maybe we can start with Panyoman, because Panyoman will be leaving, and after that I'll ask Sefi to respond and go to Parminder, if that's okay. Panyoman, would it be okay? I can sense that you're freezing. Hello, Panyoman? Okay. So, okay. Yeah, okay. So we lost him. Perhaps I can ask Safi first before we move on to the other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
It's okay, Safi. Maybe you can go
Okay.
first and then before we settle.
Okay, thank you so much, Mbak Rachel. We believe that the discussion of cross-border data flows have a really fluid discussion. There is an approach on the economic, digital, and also there is some approach in the privacy protection and some kind like that. I see like there are two diverse of the opinions about this, but what I really believe is actually about how to protect subject data, because this is the main, what should I call, like this is like should be the main discussion of this cross-border data flows, especially when Pak Nyoman said that this is data free flow with trust. So we should translate this trust to the trust from the data subject, because all the data that will be collected is really rely to the data subject. And other than that, actually we as a sub-working group digitalization have the three main recommendation on this. And the first thing is actually about the data privacy and protection. I believe because this data privacy and protection have to be basic to all data laws and agreements, national or international, and there are both individual and collective aspect of privacy. A robust data protection framework should put the control of data firmly in the hands of the individuals as data subject, like what I've mentioned before. And international norms and agreements should be worked on in this regard also, rather than enforcing a sweeping data localization policy. I believe data should be appropriately categorized based on legal and human rights requirements. Data governance and cross-border data flows are based on it. And the two things also is about the equitable distribution of benefits from data and economic rights to data that Parminder have mentioned before, because we know that there are different benefit that got by the global south and global north. But the things that we really need to emphasize is also how to build the capacity and also the infrastructure about the data protection in the global south is one thing that we should also focus on, Pak Nyoman. And also it's important when Pak Nyoman talk about the personal data protection bill in Indonesia, that we are as a civil society are really appreciate on that, but we have really want to discuss more also about the data protection authority, because we know that one of the requirement of the good implementation of personal data protection law is actually about the independency of data protection authority. I believe that Pak Nyoman have so many idea on that, because we know that this is one thing that really have many discourse in Indonesia about this authority, because it will be enforced in the near days. So I think it's really important to discuss that and hear more from Pak Nyoman about it.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Nyoman. Just want to check whether you are able to hear the questions from you, for you, or should I repeat that, Pak Nyoman?
Bu Siti, thank you for the question. Yeah, actually, I have 15 minutes here before to catch up my flight to Jakarta from Surabaya. I know there are some questions. Allow me to respond. Here there is some little connectivity problem. The first question from Mr. From Daniel, yeah, about the how to protect Indonesian policy related data localization. I'm not sure I understand correctly this question, but in my opinion, when we have more flexible data localization policy, as I mentioned, that it is not mandatory anymore data to restore in Indonesia. Only the strategic data, and only according to our government regulations, only high-level data, strategic data should be stored in Indonesia. I don't know whether the big tech company will challenge this, but it is for us it is mandatory. But the other data we can store anywhere in the world. So I'm not sure there's a challenge from the big tech company in this case here. Second one, I think there's some response question from the floor that about data protection officer agency. Yeah? I understand. I really understand. Our data protection law cover very general principles about data protection law. The other technical issues should be regulated in more detailed government regulation. I think we need another government regulation on personal data protection, for instance, about the data protection agency. I'm not expert in this area, yeah, but actually it is to be independent. It is to be independent, and it has to supervise the implementation of the law, personal data protection law in Indonesia. I think there's a question I can answer, Ibu Siti. Is there any more question I have to respond?
Oh, okay. Wait, I think there is a question from Parminder here.
Mr. Mohan, I had asked this question and I was wondering, you may have got offline, that I said that both your presentation and Sudhir's presentation were very impressive, but I also have a feeling working in India and in other countries that developing countries do not know what is happening in other developing countries because it's a fast moving area. And there should be some effort, especially among the larger developing countries with a larger digital economy, among the developing countries, to get together and try to form some common views along with their civil society and research networks and think tanks. Some kind of a two-track diplomacy or what, I don't know, but along with the think tanks, because it is both an intellectual side to it and political side to it, to develop these new frameworks. And this has to be done by developing countries because developed countries will not give you those frameworks. So there could be a possibility that few countries and their think tanks get together and work on it. What would your views be on that?
I think this is a very good idea. When we developed country can work together, yeah, to have the same view on this issue, yeah. But in my experience, I think we need to talk more, yeah. We need to have a forum for developing countries, yeah, data for development. I think many countries, including South Africa and India, also encourage this term in our declaration, our share note. But and UNTED, I think, can facilitate. UNTED, I think, can facilitate the discussion on this because UNTED is very supportive for the interest to support the interest of the developing countries. But it is not so not always easy because, as I mentioned in my presentation, not every developing country has completed not every developed country according to my slide, yeah, because this is the survey we conduct before not every developing country actually already formulated policy on this issue.
Yeah.
So we cannot discuss openly. Not every developing country have formulated policy on the idea of data people with trust. So and also some developing countries also want to have some greater room to retain the preferred domestic regulatory framework. So this kind of things maybe we need to discuss more, I think. I understand in the G20 Digital Economy Working Group, it is not much time for us to discuss in detail from the perspective of the developing countries. I think I can respond from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pak Nyoman, for that. Let's give a round of applause to also bid you farewell and have a safe travels. And with that, I also would like to request response from Sudhir. I think you also hear the interactions, the propositions to have an enclave of developing countries. So perhaps you can give comments on that and also give your final statements before I request Parminder to address the questions for you. So Sudhir, would you mind to take the floor? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I agree wholeheartedly with Parminder. This is an issue he and I discussed when I met him in Geneva in June during the WTO ministerial. It's what I've discovered in preparing for this event, in developing my presentation. I was quite surprised as well at how much of work has already been made by other African countries in addressing this issue. Many, if not all of them, are actually ahead of us. And I would wholeheartedly support us doing what I would call South-South cooperation as developing countries in developing our positions, our strategies, our policies, our regulatory regimes going forward in dealing with this issue. I think it will also give us a good platform to coordinate and solidify our positions, whether it's in the WTO, in the G20. It's a very good proposal, and I know I speak on behalf of my ministry in that we would fully support that, particularly in terms of encouraging the flow of or the discussions between our think tanks from our respective countries. And then the last issue I'd like to talk about is the point Sophia referred to. I agree with her there as well, the issue of competition. It's an extremely important aspect of the digital economy. And I'm pleased to note that our Competition Commission has already begun last year already, a rather in-depth investigation into the digital economy in South Africa in terms of the various players here, particularly with the focus of assessing whether our digital market is open and free and fair. Because it's largely dominated by the big multinationals, particularly when it comes to electronic trade. The online platforms, I think there's only one that's South African owned. So that gives you an idea of how large a share foreign entities have of our local market. So it's our Competition Commission's announcement was met with a lot of trepidation and nervousness by many in the industry. But I think speaking as a citizen, I'm extremely heartened to hear that they are taking this forward. So I'll close on that note. Thank you very much, Chair, and to everyone, and also for the invitation to participate.
Thank you so much, Sudhir. So also, let's give a round of applause to Sudhir for the remarks and responses. Last but definitely not least, I also wanting to invite Parminder for responding to the questions and also give your last statement before we officially close this event.
So first of all, thanks to Nyoman and Sudhir both to receive this idea with such warmth. And I think we really need to do it. And I was talking to other people that when the intellectual property debates, TRIPS issues started coming, then developing countries also were trying to develop their own response, access to knowledge movement, etc., along with civil society, and that is needed. Before I answer the two questions, as some of you know, that UNCTAD has already in its digital economy report called for a global data governance framework to be developed, not by WTO, very clearly, by some other agency, because data has both economic, trade, and other aspects. It's a public good, it's a public health issue, it's an education issue, so therefore it should be developed outside. Second thing I need to remind, and developing countries know it, but they keep on forgetting it, is the World Summit on the Information Society in 2005 has an unmet mandate of creating an intergovernmental platform for UN level digital policy making. So this is the World Summit on Information Society plus 20 is going to come in 2025, and its preparation would start by 23. And when plus 10 came and I was there, developing countries again said that we need a platform to discuss data issues and do policy making in this area. So this will also become a bit hot. And that's one place where the kind of discussions and thinking we are doing, because we all agree here that it's outside just a WTO issue, which is a very narrow way to look at data issue, is a multi-ferrous issue, and that's one place. So quickly the question what Kanika and we have already discussed also, and I'll go to what Shefi also said, that the main point is to protect the data subject. But the question here is that is data subject just an individual or a collective? Is data about a rare disease of which there are a few thousand patients in a city, which is anonymized, who is the data subject of that data, which is very important, can cause harm to those patients, and can also give benefit by developing medicines, which they should have right to. So who's the data subject for that data? And I can give you many examples. Farmers in a district whose soil data is taken. There is no personal data subject there, but they together own data about the soil type, the microclimate type, the slope of the farming, the color of the crop in that area. Everything is a combined data. So there's a collective data subject also. But these are very sensitive political subjects. There's a lot of political contestations around it. But first of all, we should recognize there are collective subjects, which goes to Kanika's questions that many decisions, individuals, we and you know about data. We should really admit that we don't do anything about all those permissions which pop up, because there's enough social and political theory that individuals would not act for social good. They will act narrowly for their good, and that point in which a transaction is taking place, other things disbalance their concern for some privacy, their own or common. So some of those things have to be commonly decided. And I was giving example of people will keep on talking about tuitions not being good of certain kind, but they will send their kids to the tuition. But together, if you ask them to vote that we should ban certain bad kind of tuitions, they will do it. So many of these, one, involve a collective subject. And two, even if the subject is individual, requires collective decision making. And this is one aspect of data discussions. And one of that collective now is a nation state as a place which anchors the rule of law still. We like it or not, the rule of law is still territorially anchored in a nation state. So there is some rights of the national communities also. So there are many layers of it, but this discussion should carry on. And I thought this was a very, very good subject. And we have given some not so subtle hints to the Indian groups who are going to take over for a possible agenda to possibly work forward on. And thank you for all participants.
Thank you. Also to add note that we are in a very interesting time where many countries face shrinking civic space, and therefore our democracy is on very fragile situations right now. And on that, privacy protection is really important for human rights defenders who are at the forefront of our activism. And therefore, when we are discussing about data free flows, these points need to be taken to incorporate the realities that we face. So I think this has been a very interesting discussions. And again, I want to resonate that this won't be our last time to really discuss these matters. We hope that this can be an ongoing discussions, because I think India will also have similar intricacy when discussing about these matters. But with that, being mindful of the time limitations that we have, I would like to formally close the sessions. Again, thank you so much for all the organizers, Indonesia Global Justice, HINT, ICT, IT for Change. We also have Oxfam, Wikimedia Foundations, as well as the NI, who have tirelessly working on this along with the sub-working group on digitalizations. I'm sure that soon our policy package will be available for public, and we really encourage you to access it. And before we close the Zoom room, is there any logistic information that I have to share with the participants, Mbak Rahmi? Okay, so if any online or offline participant would like to access the presentations by the resource person, feel free to contact the Secretariat of C20. Also, okay, Indonesia Global Justice Muslim. Yes. Yeah, you are the yeah, exactly, you are the one person for all, so apologize for that. And with that, thank you so much, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you. Bye.